Hello, good afternoon. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our third and final session of the day. Thank you all for joining us, all in person and online. And thank you, of course, to the FST and my fellow Foundation Future Leaders who've organised today's conference. My name's Liz Wainwright. I work with mathematicians at the University of Bristol to bridge the gap between academia, academic research and industry. So in the first two sessions today, we focused on the big picture, one of those key challenges being net zero. And this session will focus on the theme of careers and leadership in science and technology. As has been touched on in previous sessions, with the challenges that lie ahead, being a leader in research and the innovation sector is no mean feat. And I think that this is summarised particularly neatly by the news that I heard on the radio this morning, that the Collins English Dictionary has chosen its word of the year as permacrisis, which means an extended period of instability and insecurity. So as well as sharing with us their wealth of experience and knowledge as leaders in science and technology, our panellists for this session are challenged with the task of answering the question, how can one make a successful career in science and technology? And with that, I'd like to welcome our first speaker. Hayaatun Sillem is Chief Executive at the Royal Academy of Engineering. She has extensive leadership experience in the UK and international engineering. She's been named as one of the inspiring 50 women in tech, one of the most influential women in engineering, and was awarded a Suffragette Science Award last year. She was also awarded her CBE in the 2020 New Year's Honours for services to international engineering. Hayaatun is a champion also of equity, diversity and inclusion activities, including her work with Sir Lewis Hamilton to encourage Black representation in UK motorsport. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sillem.
Thank you so much, Liz, for that warm welcome, and thank you for inviting me to join your conference today. I'm a big fan of the Future Leaders programme, and not only because I'm a trustee of the FST, but I've seen it firsthand, that the value of what you do and the extraordinary network that you comprise. So I'm going to give a quick tour of my career, just to kind of set the scene for the rest of my talk. So after a master's in biochemistry, I embarked on what I might call chapter one of my career, which was in biomedical research. So I did a PhD student, I was a PhD student at the forerunner to the Crick Institute. And that was all going brilliantly. I was having a whale of a time until, unfortunately, very unexpectedly, I developed severe chemical sensitivities that meant that I had to find something else to do with my life because a career in the lab wasn't really an option anymore. So chapter two of my career took me, and I'll be quite honest, with absolutely no plan or particular insight, into the world of science and engineering policy. And during this time, I spent a couple of years working as a committee specialist at the House of Commons for the Science and Technology Select Committee, covering topics as varied as the use of human embryology technology to delivering complex software projects across government, through to the use of forensic evidence in the legal system. So you will have already gathered that the idea of being a specialist in that context was very much relative. I had to be a specialist in terms of my ability to advise the MPs that I was working with. It was a professionally very rewarding experience. It was very stimulating, intellectually challenging, a great citizen's education. And I'll be honest, I also dined out on my House of Commons stories for many years after that, and I'm going to resist the very strong temptation to comment on what's been happening there of late. So in the third chapter of my career, I worked on engineering and science for international development, initially by helping Professor Sir Gordon Conway, who was the first departmental chief scientific advisor at DFID, the Department for International Development, establish his office as his function as CSA, and to develop draft one of the department's first science and innovation strategy. In chapter 4, I surprised myself by returning to an organisation I'd worked at previously, the Royal Academy of Engineering. And in the process, I learned a salutary life lesson, which is that it's always good not to slam the door when you leave an organisation, because you never know when you might want to reopen it. So let's bring things up to date. Following over 10 years at the Academy, at the Royal Academy of Engineering, where I started their international activities, building on my work at DFID, then becoming a director, eventually deputy CEO, and finally in 2018, at the start of 2018, I became the CEO. So that brings me on to chapter 5, where I currently am. And I have my day job, or day jobs actually, as CEO of the Academy, and also our subsidiary charity, the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering Foundation. So both of these are charities focused on harnessing engineering excellence for public good. And alongside that, I have a range of portfolio roles, non-executive roles. So, for example, I do various things with government. I chaired the government's innovation expert group that advised on the development of the innovation strategy, published a couple of years ago now. And now I think I chair still, all the uncertainty in government. I just want to check that's still the case, but I think I chair the government's Business Innovation Forum. And I sit on the Digital Skills Council and the Levelling Up Advisory Council as well. I also enjoy being a trustee on various charities. So in addition to the FST, I'm also a charity trustee for Engineering UK and for Mission 44, which is the new charitable foundation established by Lewis Hamilton, the Formula 1 racing driver. And that follows on from my role as co-chair of his commission, looking at how we can improve the representation of Black people in UK motorsport. And then earlier this year, I took on my first private sector non-exec role as a non-exec director of the construction company Laing O'Rourke. So based on all that, you'll probably not be incredibly surprised to hear that I'm not someone who's ever had a grand master plan that I've been trying to follow religiously as I go through my career. In fact, I'm still slightly wondering what I'm actually going to be when I grow up. But I think it's also important to say that I've never experienced that lack of formal plan as in any way a barrier to enjoying and hopefully being successful in my career. I think one reason for that is that quite early on and along the way, I've tried to refine my sense of what it is that I offer when I'm looking at a role or a career. And alongside that, where I will thrive and what makes me happy and fulfilled. And I really believe that it's this kind of self-knowledge that's one of the most important success factors for any career, including in science and technology, because it enables you to assess opportunities that come your way, assess opportunities that are out there in the world around you, and create opportunities that are likely to lead to mutual success for you, but also for your employer, your colleagues, the teams you work with. So to put a bit more colour on that, I am someone who's very strongly purpose motivated. I have to feel this strong, almost burning, authentic alignment with the mission of the organisation that I'm involved with. I also have learnt that I like to go where I can make most difference. And that often means going where I am most different. So that's part of the reason that I've ended up working in engineering so long. It's probably not a massive shock if I say that there are not that many people in leadership roles in engineering who look like I do, including, if I look back over the 5 years I've been CEO, it's been a kind of continuous experience of people really being quite surprised when they find out what I do. And that gives me an opportunity to change perceptions, to potentially contribute to cultural change, just because I'm doing what I'm doing in a way that's unexpected or different. I also figured out quite a long time before I became the CEO that autonomy is something that's really important to me. So I would rather be a larger cog in a small machine than a small cog in a larger machine. Because again, it's that sense of wanting to make a difference, wanting to have autonomy, wanting to be able to see things through. And that can mean that, and then the next thing I would say is that I love being in a place where I can keep learning and progressing. So progression isn't always about getting a new job. Progression isn't always about, a new job title or climbing the next rung of the ladder. For me, progression and learning is the sense that I am developing new skills, expanding my understanding, contributing in a new way. So that can mean moving between sectors or organisations, and it can mean, for example, the non-executive roles which I now do, which hopefully enable me to really make a contribution, but in the process to get an insight into how different organisations work, to expand my knowledge and ideas that I can then bring back into my day job. So we're all different. There is no template for what success looks like in a career. And I really believe that if you know what makes you thrive, you've got a much higher chance of finding roles where you can do so. So that's my top tip. That's the thing that I think has been the most useful learning that I've experienced in my career so far. So moving from that personal context to the professional context where I now work. The Academy is very strongly committed to nurturing the next generation of talent in engineering and to supporting the development of progressive engineering leaders across all sectors. For those of you that don't know us, does this work? Where should I be pointing this? Oh, there we are. Those of you that don't know us, we're the UK's National Academy for Engineering Technology. We interpret that very broadly. It's everything from engineering biology through to structural engineering, computing, medtech, very broad. And we have an overarching goal, which is to harness the power of engineering to build a sustainable society and an inclusive economy that works for everyone. Those two pillars of sustainable society and inclusive economy really form the foundation of everything that we do. And within that, we have 3 strands of activity, which cover talent and diversity, innovation, and policy and engagement. So our talent activities fall into 2 groups, programmes aimed at attracting a new and more diverse generation into engineering, and thought leadership and convening activities to shape the future of engineering skills in the UK and beyond. And this slide here just gives an overview of one tranche of our programmes, our research programmes, which cover a range of career stages. I'm not going to go into any detail today, but there's plenty on our website, or you can get in touch with me afterwards if you'd like to know more. So, just again to provide a little bit of context, in case you're not familiar with engineering specifically, we have a very long-standing skills shortfall and diversity deficit in engineering, unfortunately. So pre-pandemic data, we don't have up-to-date stats, unfortunately, indicated that we needed up to an additional 59,000 engineers per annum in order to meet the UK skills needs. And our profession, even in 2022, unfortunately comprises only 16.5% women, despite many years of effort. And you're more than twice as likely to be unemployed after graduation if you're a Black or minority ethnic engineering graduate compared to your white counterparts, even if you control for the type of degree for the class of degree you got or the type of university you went to. Those are just a handful of data points. Unfortunately, there are a whole range of other data points that I could use to illustrate our diversity deficit. Unfortunately, that although we haven't made progress at an acceptable pace, I think it's also fair to say that if you step back, there has been progress made in recent years across engineering, and I'm relieved to say the wider science and technology community. If nothing else, there is a much greater appetite to take collective ownership and responsibility for our diversity deficit, and to recognise that an inclusive culture is a hallmark of a culture of success, rather than this notion that has afflicted our community for far too many years, which is there is a trade-off to be made between diversity and excellence. It is inconceivable to me that anyone believes that inclusive leadership is not excellent leadership, or that diverse teams working in inclusive cultures don't deliver higher quality outcomes than homogenous teams working in uninclusive cultures. And the evidence base for that is increasingly strong. And I am pleased that this is now moving towards the mainstream of science and technology compared to where we were even a couple of years ago. So diversity and inclusion is a massive priority for our academy. We have a leadership role within our community, and you'll see on this slide a range of activities that we're undertaking. There are actually several more that aren't on the slide to improve diversity and inclusion in engineering. Just to pick out a couple, our Diversity Impact Programme provides funding of up to £100,000 for new projects in university engineering departments that seek to address the unequal outcomes experienced by students from underrepresented groups. And our aim is to understand which interventions are most successful and to accelerate our collective learning cycles. We need to be smarter at using data and evidence to focus on which interventions are effective, and then to try and do this at scale and with critical mass. And I'm excited that we're also shortly to start piloting a new platform to support startup and scale-up organisations and embedding EDI into their organisations. We've seen a lot of appetite for this, but our research shows that the amount of support for targeted EDI capacity building for early stage and smaller companies is much weaker, much smaller than for corporates, where there's actually much more maturity around how you embed EDI. And like all our programs, in keeping with both good engineering design principles and best practices in inclusion, we work very closely with our target community, in this case, our startups, to develop these tools. One thing that's not on the slide, but which I'd just like to spend a moment on, is our Fellowship Fit for the Future initiative, which is a campaign that's seeking to diversify our fellowship. I mean, not grant holders, but the Academy's fellows. And the headline for that is that we committed to elect half of all fellows from underrepresented groups over a 5-year period from 2021 to 2025. And I don't have details to go into all of the changes we've made to support that. There's, of course, a proactive search function. But I think one of the most important changes we made was a guarantee that during this period, and hopefully in perpetuity, candidates for a fellowship from underrepresented groups would automatically, providing they met the threshold for excellence, be considered at the final selection meeting. It's a very simple change. You're not guaranteeing they will become fellows, but you're saying if they come from an underrepresented group and they meet your threshold for excellence, they automatically get to be considered at that final decision-making meeting, so that they don't fall out of the process prematurely. And although there's still a long way to go, we have comfortably met our target for those first 2 years. And just to bring that to life a little bit, we've elected over the first 2 years of their campaign 10 fellows of Black ethnicity, compared to about the same number in the history of the Academy. So we were only born in 1976, we're not as old as some other academies, but still that does focus one's mind a bit. And similarly, in terms of female fellows, we've elected 33 women in the first 2 years of the campaign, compared to 114 before the campaign started in the lifetime of the Academy. So in addition to our work to improve the experience and recognition of those working in engineering, we're also very active in trying to attract a new and more diverse generation into engineering, notably through our This Is Engineering campaign, which seeks to reposition engineering careers in the minds of young people and those who influence them. We started initially as a social media campaign, a digital marketing campaign, and I'm delighted that the videos that feature early career engineers doing inspiring but relatable things have been viewed over 58 million times by a largely gender balanced audience of teenagers since the campaign started in 2018. And we have empirical evidence that shows that watching these videos increases the willingness of those young people to consider careers in engineering. For the last couple of years, we've been running a spin-off day, which we previously called This Is Engineering Day, and have renamed this year National Engineering Day, to provide a collective opportunity to celebrate and make visible the engineers who are shaping our world, the hidden enablers of so much of what we take for granted in modern life. As it happens, National Engineering Day is tomorrow. I can feel your excitement already, and I would really love to have your involvement in supporting that, even if it's as simple as just a tweet with a hashtag National Engineering Day, to show your excitement at either being part of this fantastic profession or your support for the roles engineers play in improving lives. And if you happen to identify as any other type of scientist or innovator, please don't think this is something that is intended to compete or be divisive. We love and we need the whole of our science and technology community to succeed and to thrive. But it remains the case that engineering, plus physics and computing, which often form the foundation of engineering careers, are the ones that consistently attract the lowest number of women and girls. We drag down that STEM average in terms of gender to where it is. And there are many parts of STEM where women are overrepresented, if you look at it in that sense. We are therefore most at need of an image upgrade, as this slide, which was from fairly early on in the campaign, shows. I'm glad to say we've made some progress since then. We have much more gender diversity and ethnic diversity in the people who are wearing the hard hats. They are still wearing the hard hats. That's a very difficult nut to crack. But if we follow the current trajectory, we will not achieve gender parity, even in entrance to engineering degrees, until 2085. And I hope you agree with me that that is just unacceptable. Engineers have a profoundly important role in shaping our world, and we need them to be more reflective of society. So the final aspect of diversity I'd like to flag as being important is place-based diversity. We often talk about the fact that science and engineering is heavily weighted towards the Golden Triangle. In fact, engineering strengths are distributed much more evenly across the whole country, and I'm very excited that tomorrow, as part of National Engineering Day, we'll be releasing the first tranche of new data showing the engineering economy in terms of GVA and significance to employment across different parts of the UK, and you will see that this reaches far beyond the Golden Triangle. And we at the Academy also run a growing programme regionally, including an enterprise hub in Belfast and new ones being opened in Wales and Scotland at the moment. So this spirit of access and mobility, and in the process, connectivity and mutual empathy between the different parts of our engineering community and beyond is carried right across our portfolio. Many of our schemes are focused on facilitating people mobility, the transfer of people, the contact of people between industry and academia, whether that's through visiting professorships or industrial fellowships, but also mutual connectivity and mutual understanding between different communities, such as the intelligence community and the research community through our intelligence community postdoc scheme. Or as shown here, our policy fellowships that enable senior civil servants to develop systems thinking skills and access the expertise within the broad engineering community. And it's got some really positive feedback. So if it's something you're interested in, please do get in touch. I'm really proud of the fact that the Academy now focuses its entire programme of work around those twin pillars of sustainable society and inclusive economy. And I hope you can see the extent to which our commitment to, in this case, inclusion, really is woven throughout our talent offer. Engineers and scientists do shape our world. They have a profoundly important role in our experience of society today and the future that we will all be part of. And it's vital that we become professions that better reflect the society that we serve and interface, and which step up to take responsibility for who has access to and who benefits from the work that we undertake. So thank you for what you all contribute towards that. And I really look forward to working with you to make this a reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hayaatun. And thank you for your reflections on the importance of an inclusive culture and how that is a hallmark of success and there's not a trade-off between the two there. And also the importance of role of scientists and technologists in affecting the world around us, and that we must be reflective of the people in the world around us too. Our next speaker is Isabel is Deputy Director for Research Talent and European Programmes at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. This role includes responsibility for the implementation of the R&D People and Culture Strategy, Research Mobility and Migration, and Horizon Europe. Prior to this, Isabel held multiple roles across BEIS and other government departments, largely focusing on science, research and higher education. Please join me in welcoming Isabel as our second speaker.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you everyone for having me. It's really nice to be here, and it's nice to actually do it in person. Like, I've done one of these virtually during COVID, and actually it's a whole different game doing it in person, seeing so many people here. So that's really, really nice. I'm not entirely sure I can top what Hayaatun gave you, but what I thought I was going to do is give you a little bit of, I guess, the government lens on the topic of careers and leadership in science and technology. So as Liz said when she introduced me, my team are responsible for, well, they were responsible for publishing the People and Culture Strategy, and now we're looking at implementing that and how we can take that forward, but also looking more widely at people in R&D and talent and how we can best support people through that. So I'll tell you a little bit about where we're up to there and what we are thinking. There we go. So the R&D People and Culture Strategy, you've possibly heard of it, but if you haven't, then that is totally okay. So the strategy got published last summer, and it was one really big step for us because it really recognised that people are at the heart of R&D. Like, all of the government rhetoric about science superpower, what you need to get great R&D in science and tech underway in the UK, like, a lot of it depends on the people working in it. And that was explicitly recognised in the strategy, which was great. The overall aim of it is really just to ensure that the UK has the people we need at all levels, but also working in a culture that gets the best out of everyone and delivers the best outcomes for the country. And there's a vision that sits behind that, which is for a more inclusive, dynamic, productive and sustainable UK R&D sector, where a diversity of people and ideas can thrive. So it is both about supporting the people, but also about the environment that those people work in to really make that attractive. We've got here on the slide the little pyramid that we designed as part of that, but it just shows you a little bit that we've got a vision, some goals, some early announcements and things we're doing, but also longer term outcomes we want to achieve. Broadly, everything is split into people, culture and talent. So people is very much, as you might imagine, having enough people with the right skills in the right areas, getting them to thrive. Culture is then more about the environment that they work in. So making sure it's inclusive, making sure we tackle things like bullying and harassment, those sorts of things. And then talent, again, is about making sure we attract and retain talented researchers in these careers, and whether that is academia or industry or more widely, but making sure we have that attraction there. So there is a lot in there about kind of career opportunities, how we can improve that wider environment, and really making sure that everybody can be at their best. There are a number of specific policy commitments, as I mentioned, but the goals are much wider than that. And actually, we recognized when we published a strategy that because it is quite all-encompassing, it is not something where government can implement 10 things and then suddenly everything is fixed, happy days. Is unfortunately not as simple as that. A lot of the changes we're talking about need a bit more cultural change, and they also need engagement from beyond just government. So what we've set out in the strategy are a number of outcomes that we therefore want to see sort of further down the line. Many, but not all, are relevant for careers in leadership. So I've put a few on here. So we want to see more dynamic, varied and sustainable career paths. So a move away from that perception that, particularly in academia, there's sort of one run of the ladder you need to climb and you kind of can't diverge from that. That's it. Making sure there's recognition and reward of all the people and activities that lead to excellent research. So moving away from just focusing on publication record, for example. We wanted to see all people from all backgrounds inspired into careers in R&D and innovation by our talent offer. And there's also a lot there about focusing on leadership and encouraging movement and collaboration between academia, industry, third sector, etc. So that's kind of where we wanted to go with that. And I'll give you a little bit of an overview of how far we have got. I mean, the implementation is well underway, so quite a bit has happened already. You can see a few things on the slides here. There is more to it. So we're more than a year on, and both us in BASE, but also UKRI, who we work really closely with, and other partners have done quite a lot to deliver on the more immediate commitments. So for example, on people, UKRI have led a cross-sectoral consultation on the new deal for postgraduate research. So that was a consultation this year that has now closed, and they're analysing responses and next steps. There's been a review of the STEM Ambassadors programme, for example, and its impacts, for seeing whether there is any more that can be done there. Some other things, like we have provided some funding to the Royal Society, for example, to launch a UK Young Academy, and are working with UKRI, who have their early career researchers network, to really try and give, in particular, early career researchers a bit more of a voice in the wider debates around R&D policy, science and tech. So that's a few things on people. On culture, UKRI have been driving the adoption of the resume for research and innovation. I don't know whether you're familiar with that, but that's a narrative style CV, which is really designed to recognise a much broader spectrum of contributions and career achievements than maybe has traditionally been the case, particularly in academia. They've hosted a really large international event on this, and it's really designed to help with that mobility and enable people to not just have very linear, narrow career paths, but actually move in between different sectors and still be successful and not have that stand in their way. The government has published the bureaucracy review, and that's currently considering how to implement that and consider the recommendations. So there should be more coming out shortly on that. UKRI have published a new open access policy, for example, that has also since begun The Sectoral Forum for Tackling Bullying and Harassment has developed some new guidance on preventing bullying, harassment and discrimination. There's been some research on community youth engagement. Again, quite a lot happening on culture. Talent, similarly, quite a lot on the way. So we've made some improvements, further improvements to the global talent visa, for example, temporary worker visa routes to make that more attractive. We've also worked with the Cabinet Office to launch something called the Great Talent Campaign, which includes a website where particularly researchers from abroad who are interested in coming to the UK have a bit of a one-stop shop where they can find, you know, practical information, career information, but also information about funding that is available in the UK. And there's been the new high potential individual visa route that launched recently. And there's some things beyond that. So we have a ministerial coordination group for the implementation of the strategy that is set up. That's got some working groups underneath that. And we're also looking at how we can get a bigger voice of early career researchers and people on the ground into that debate and really guide the implementation of the strategy beyond just, you know, we're committed to doing these 10 things and when we're done, that's it. And we carried out the first UK-wide survey of the R&I workforce over the summer. So that's never been done. We hope to publish the results a little bit later this year and then hope to do that fairly regularly going forward, because obviously unless you have a way of measuring your progress, it is very difficult to know whether you're actually moving or not. So that was a little bit on the people and culture strategy, but obviously that's kind of one aspect of what we worry about within government. There is loads more. So we as BEIS invest in funding and offering attractive fellowships and the like through our various partners. So we provide quite a lot of funding to UKRI, so UK Research and Innovation. That's in the scale of about 8 billion a year. But we also fund the UK National Academies, including the Royal Academy of Engineering, to the scale of about 200 million a year. But obviously the academies are independent of government, whereas UKRI is an arm's length body. But through both of those, what we do is that we invest in talent and fellowships across all careers, across all disciplines. But specifically, we're always looking to support things that align with wider government priorities. So, for example, schemes that bring people together from across industry, academia, facilitate that collaboration and that mobility in the better exchange between the two. And there are some really wonderful examples, both within UKRI and the academies of where that is working really well. And that is really great. But we're always trying to keep it really agile. So I put on here two things that were probably a bit random that nobody quite expected to have to deal with this year, but that came out. So, for example, the British Academy set up a scheme for Ukrainian researchers at risk in response to the Ukraine-Russian war, and that is something that we have supported. We've also worked with UKRI to uplift the PhD stipend levels in response to the cost of living crisis. So it's not a static thing for us. We're always keeping that under review and trying to make improvements. And then lastly, I guess there is a more international angle to what we do. So many of you will probably know that historically, Horizon 2020, the EU's previous research programme, has been a really key route for a lot of people. It's been key for attracting talent and encouraging diverse and international career paths. And that was one of the reasons why, despite leaving the EU, the UK government decided that we wanted to still be associated to the successor programme, which is Horizon Europe. And that absolutely remains our goal, and we're trying to make that happen. But so far, unfortunately, the EU haven't followed through and haven't formalised that agreement. So what we have done is we've got a guarantee in place at the moment, which means that anybody applying who's successful can still get funded, which is great. But obviously, we know that that's not necessarily a sustainable position. So we're also working on what we would do if we really cannot associate, and putting in place a set of alternative schemes. And again, a lot of that touches on talent. So we published over the summer some quite detailed plans on what we would do, but we're looking at, as I mentioned, a big chunk of that will be focusing on talent. So providing similarly prestigious fellowships and opportunities for international mobility and movement across industry, academia. Again, looking at supporting all career stages and looking at more generous offers and with less bureaucracy, and also outward mobility options. So a little bit of a tour around what we're doing, but hopefully you can see that you have a little bit of a strand through where we've identified a number of areas that we want to address throughout the government policies and the funding streams that we give, and how that plays through a little bit. Of course, there is a lot happening, but always more to be done. So as I said at the start, unfortunately, there is only so much that is directly within our control. Like, it would be lovely, wouldn't it, if there was like a nice switch that we could just flick and suddenly happy days, we have much more sustainable, less precarious careers in R&D, science and technology. Unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as that. There are some areas where there's always going to be more work to be done, always more that government can do. But we also really need a cultural shift in some of these areas. And that takes time, but it will also need to happen bottom up. So like one of the challenges that I've touched on is that how do you make career paths less linear? So clearly we can dismantle some of the obstacles that are in the way, but really you need a bit of a cultural shift of people actually seeing different things as valuable and organizations wanting to support more innovative routes. And I'd be really interested in your views as well on what more we can do, but what more we can support others to do as well. And so sector engagement and engagement from people on the ground and people like yourselves will be really critical in making these kind of more cultural shifts happen, actually. So as I said, the job won't be done if we take off all the actions. It's a longer piece of work, and we really want everybody to be involved in that and trying to make sure we can really make change happen. Like, I strongly believe it is possible. There's really good conversations that have started. There is momentum, but it needs to be a collective effort to really make that sustainable change happen. So that is all I was going to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabel, and thank you for that overview of the R&D people and culture strategy, and some of those really important themes, which I think have kind of been touched on a little in this morning's sessions as well, of certainly around what might need to change in the R&D culture. That culture change certainly doesn't happen overnight and absolutely cannot only come from top down, but needs to come from those people on the ground. Okay, so our final speaker for this session before we go into our Q&A session is Professor Rachel A. Mills. Rachel leads the academic activities across King's College London as their Senior Vice President Academic. Her role links together education and research ambitions, and she's also responsible for shaping the academic vision and future plans of the college. Rachel has over 15 years of leadership, including at her previous institution, the University of Sussex. She's a deep sea oceanographer who works on the chemistry of the seafloor and its impact on life in the sea. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mills.
So thank you, Liz, and thank you all, and welcome to all of you online. I think we've also got people online watching. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Obviously, King's College is just around the corner, so I'm a local. I'm going to give you some perspectives from university perspective. As Liz said, I'm now at King's, but I've only been at King's for 2 months. Before that, I was at Sussex, and before that, I was at Southampton. So I'm going to bring some evidence from across my entire career to talk about what happens in universities and how we can be more porous and think about career progression and development of future leaders. So a little bit again about my backstory, and a bit like Tamara Finkelstein this morning, I'm going to talk about my father. I haven't got a story like Tamara to tell, but my father was also an engineer, and I think there is a theme there. And he was an engineer that allowed me and my sister, who's in the photograph on the left, to play in his lab. This was before health and safety. So I was brought up just being allowed to play in an academic laboratory on the Birmingham University campus. And I think that really helped me become sort of courageous. It helped me think I could solve problems. And he brought us up to think we could do anything. anything we wanted. I had a big family. I'm the eldest of a lot of people. And I think, again, that made me realize that when you have a team of little brothers in particular, you have to put them in the right place and you have to make sure they all play to their strengths. Otherwise, the football game is not going to be fair. And I think there's a theme there that goes through everything I'm going to say today. I then became an oceanographer, a deep sea oceanographer. I did a PhD in oceanography, and I spent most of my career at Southampton, at the National Oceanography Centre, Southampton. Being an oceanographer is a bit like being an engineer. You have to build interdisciplinary teams of technicians and officers and crew on ships and PhD students and senior scientists. And you build that team for short periods of time, for maybe a month or 2 months if you're unlucky, on board that ship. You have very makeshift laboratories that things break and you have to fix them using the skills my dad taught me. And you work in really, far afield in Antarctica, in the middle of the Pacific. And so I think, again, my scientific discipline has used a lot of those skills that we're all talking about today, about working in teams, working in interdisciplinary teams, building those teams and recognizing what each person's role in that team is. And then moved up the ladder. We've talked about moving up the ladder. I actually did that in a rather linear fashion. I know that's very old-fashioned, and maybe not many people in this room will do that, but I was privileged to do that, move up the academic ladder, and I'm now a senior vice president academic. And so this picture in the bottom right is from my role at Sussex, where it's still about people. It's still about building teams of people from across a wide range of disciplines, even outside science and technology, into arts and humanities and social science, and building those teams and getting people to work together. So I think that's really where I've come from. And I'm going to talk about essentially how we can use the science and technology to bridge the whole of society. Why did I come to King's? I came to King's because King's, any of you that know anything about King's will recognize that King's has a massive amount of sort of health disciplines and is really strong in the social sciences, but actually doesn't do much in engineering and technology and science. And my role is very much about building that bridge between those two different disciplines, rebuilding chemistry, natural sciences, engineering at King's to actually solve societal problems, doing that translation from health through technology into science policy. And that's what really attracted me to this role, but I think it's how we need to work in society at the moment. So I was asked to talk a little bit about the key issues for careers in the sector. So I came up with this list, and there you can see the smiley face and the sad face. And I don't want to focus too much on one or the other, but I want to make the point that it is a balance. Those of us that work in universities have some of the best jobs in the world. We have huge amounts of autonomy. We essentially can do what we like as long as we can get funded and as long as we continue to publish. So we have amazing amounts of autonomy. We have ready-made networks that are global. We can join a university. I've been at King's for 2 months and I've got a global network of health professionals I didn't know before that I can tap into and build on that network. This incredibly powerful reach that the university sector has. And we also have a very clear mission. We have a mission for building that pipeline of talent that comes through into the science and technology sector. And we're part of that. They keep us young, those students that we're educating. And then we're turning those students into graduates that populate the world. So we have real social purpose. But there are negatives, and I do need to point this out. It's tough times in the academic sector at the moment, and any of you that are in the room that are thinking about an academic job will be really aware of this. And we just need to look at these challenges face on. We've already talked about the barriers to progression in terms of diversity. The academy is very, very white in some areas. It's very, very privileged in some areas. And we need to address those, how to build the diversity of the pipeline into our disciplines in science and technology. There is a cost of living crisis that our PhD students are directly being affected by. And again, we've done some great work uplifting the PhD stipend, but that won't be the end of it. And we've got to do that. We're going to have to review that and keep looking at this and make sure that the people at the entry level to our disciplines can actually live in London, where the cost of living is extraordinary. We've got precarity, those fixed term contracts, and people have to navigate more and more fixed term contracts as they move up that sort of ladder. And we've got to recognize that. So I'm not going to read all these out, so it'll depress you, but I guess my job in a nutshell is to minimize the things on the top left and to maximize the things on the bottom right. And I'm held to account by my colleagues across King's College and at Sussex before that and at Southampton. So our job is to essentially fix all the top left things. And again, I was asked to think about how to build a successful career in science and technology. And these are really what I wrote down, having thought about this a lot, having moved jobs a few times in the last few years. Again, I'm not going to read out the list, but I'm going to talk a bit about how I've framed this. And I think it's really important because I think this is relevant inside and outside the university sector. I think all of us need to be able to, and somebody else said this already today, work out what environment you thrive in and work out how to get into that environment. Or if you can't, work out how to change the environment around you so that it looks like the environment you thrive in. Now, I thrive in the university environment. It's not for everybody. And so I think it's that self-realization of what sort of environment you will thrive in, whether it's big fish in small pond or small fish in big pond. Everybody's different and everybody will have a place where they will thrive. And it's about owning that and creating that yourself, but working with others to do it. I'm a big fan of both coaching and mentoring, and there's a difference between the two. And I just want to explain that. I think, and when I say be your own coach, I mean, I'm a marathon runner. I know I don't look like one, but I am a marathon runner. And there are huge amounts of resources online that you can use to coach yourself to actually get yourself around a marathon. And I'm a living proof of that. So coaching is really important in terms of task oriented, getting yourself match fit to do whatever task, whether it's the next interview, get yourself the next job, get yourself the next conference, get that grant over the line. Mentoring is a much longer term game. Mentoring is a much more sort of career long relationship with somebody that can advise you, help you. But I have coaches and I have mentors, and I often find my own coaches online. But mentors are relationships you have for long periods of time, and it's important to give back. So I mentor other people, and I have a whole series of mentors, none of whom are in the room, but maybe some of them are watching. And those relationships are really, really important. And so don't think that when you get to be a senior vice president, you stop doing this. It's probably more important to just make sure that you're constantly what I call match fit, ready to get out there. I think it's all about connections. It's about building bridges inside and outside the academy. And we're going to talk a bit more about that, I think. But it's really important we don't sit in our ivory tower and we build those connections. I think that's been a real theme for today in terms of having porous boundaries, so we can work with industry, we can work with the public sector, we can work with NGOs, we can work with all of our stakeholders. And if we can do that more effectively, we can innovate better in the UK and beyond. And I want to give just one example of that. So one of the things I was most proud of at Southampton was that, the way we changed the way we incentivized the promotion scheme in Southampton. We really broadened it out from being not a single sort of H-index academic conference attendance, all the standard ways of looking for promotion up to professor. We broadened it right out. And it's only since I've moved to other institutions I've realized how innovative Southampton was in this way. And so people at Southampton can get promoted for their industry partnership work, for their enterprise work, for their education contributions, for their professional skills, whether they're a musician or a novelist. So there's a lot of different ways of moving up the ladder. Now, obviously, that's about implementing that locally. And when I was Dean of the Faculty in Southampton, I'm really proud that I saw people go out into industry, spend several years out in industry, bring those skills back and use that experience and evidence from that experience to achieve promotion within the organisation. And until we do that systematically, until we do that across the board, allow people to move in and out of sectors, but recognise and reward their contributions from what they did, that may not be publishing papers in Nature, it may not be about getting that huge UKRI grant, and we can recognise that and reward it. We will change the research culture by doing that. And I know we can do it, but King's has some way to go on this, Sussex has some way to go on this, a lot of universities I'm sure that are represented in the room have some way to go on this. Okay, so that moves me on to movement between sectors. And again, we've talked about this, and I think I've started to do that rather late in my career. So I've become a non-executive director for CFAS, which is an executive agency of DEFRA. I know there's a lot of DEFRA people in the room. I've found that fascinating to bring some of my science and leadership skills to add into the public sector and to contribute to developing strategy, turning science evidence into policy, working in that space. And it's been hugely satisfying for me. And I think I've added some value to CFAS's activity. I haven't gone as far as going into industry yet, and I think that'll be something really interesting to do. So all of us can think about navigating, adding different elements of a portfolio to our career. Don't leave it too late, would be what I would say. I left it quite late in my career. But I've already mentioned this. I think when I was in Southampton, I encouraged staff to make that leap, to either do secondments for 3 months or 6 months or 2 years. Try things out, get out there and take those opportunities, move in and out of the sector, because I think it adds huge value to the teams you work in, and it adds huge interest to your CV when you're looking for the next step. So I think there are many, many pathways up through that ladder. I happen to have had a very linear one. I predict that most people who are at the earlier stage in their career won't have nearly as a linear arrangement in the way they go. I think you need those connections and mentors and champions and coaches that could help you navigate across these different sectors, because it's not easy. The language is different, the expectations are different, but we are here as essentially a community that can help each other along this journey. So my final slide is some personal reflections on leadership, and I think hopefully it will pull together some themes from what I've heard today. And I'm going to go back to my father. I learned a lot of what I've written down here from my father's approach to how he treated his parenting, it turns out. And I didn't realize that at the time. You only realize that as you get much older. But I think I've found that team leadership has worked really well in the university sector. That hasn't always been the case, but I think in the modern day university sector, you work in multiple different teams. So I work in a senior leadership team, I work in an executive team, I work in my disciplinary team, I work in etc. And those teams all intersect, and it's about enabling every member of that team to be the best they can be. And those leadership skills, I think I learned in the playground when I was a child, and I've essentially just refined them as I've gone on. I think my role is mainly, and again, this has been said already, it's about aligning those team objectives with the overall ambitions of the organization or the UK or the sector, whatever we're trying to do at the time. And so it's about clarification, and it's about making sure that everyone knows what their personal expectations are. And I'm making it sound really simple. In practice, this is hard, but it is actually really simple. And so I think the last thing to say is I think it's about bringing your whole self to the room. And I think you've seen that today. We've seen some really impressive sort of personal anecdotes. We've seen people telling really personal stories about their journey. And that's really powerful that we can all do that and learn from each other. And again, this morning, someone was talking about storytelling. We need to learn how to tell those stories, but we also need to learn how to translate those stories so we can understand each other. But with that, I'll finish.
Thank you, Rachel, and for sharing your experiences on your what you call linear career path, but I'm sure as unique as anybody else's as well. And it was great to hear some reflections about, what it takes to be a leader. I'd like to invite the panel up, as well as my colleague, Dr. Thomas Davey. So Tom is also a foundation future leader on the 2022 cohort. Tom is a senior experimental officer at FloWave at the University of Edinburgh. FloWave is an ocean energy research facility based at the University of Edinburgh. And Tom has a primary research interest in marine renewables. And he works at that very exciting interface between academia and industry. And his role interacts with and combines, and contributes to both of these parts of the innovation sector. So first of all, I'm going to ask Tom for some reflections on the three talks that we just heard.
Yeah, thanks for that, Liz. Thanks for that, Liz. I actually pick up one point of about career progression and elements used in promotion is, since that was written, I'm now principal experimental officer, and it wasn't based on publications, so I can pick up some of that. But yeah, I think I'm in very prestigious company here, and I'm not sure I'm entirely qualified to talk about what makes a successful career, but perhaps what is interesting about that's what my personal situation is. I'm in an academic environment. I am technically an academic, but I'm not in a conventional academic role. And lot of what I do, without getting into the detail of it, with the laboratory that we operate, is working on a combination of academic work and things like contract research. So I do about 50% of my work is working purely for industrial contracts, and then there's a big grey area in between. But I think because it's this sort of idea of a hybrid role, like I say, I have not sort of progressed through that through having an exemplary publication record, although it's okay. It's not what it would sort of compare with someone who is a senior lecturer. It would be a sort of equivalent role. And I think the idea of dynamic career paths is really, really interesting, because I manage a team of 8. It's very interdisciplinary, actually, including, well, until a while ago, included oceanographers as well in that group. And actually, in our sector, there's actually quite good movement between academia and industry, but it does sort of occur to me today that it's actually much more commonplace at the early career stage. And for someone more like mid-career, that sort of those opportunities tend to peter out a little bit. So a lot of the companies I work with are actually SME sized. So my personal expertise has been in wave energy, which is still a very small sector. They will take anyone talented who's going, and the group is small enough that if the right academic projects come up, which are often with industrial partners, those same people will jump back into an academic setting. But what we're sort of seeing is, as we try and sort of progress those people into sort of mid-career stage, up till probably quite recently, it has been that element of the sort of publish or perish issue. But actually, much like in Southampton, we've now got this sort of process where, essentially, my own experience was get promoted based on the industrial research I brought in more than anything else. Now, there were marks there for the publications I did, and there were marks there for the academic projects in which I'm investigator on, but that wasn't enough in its own right. So one of the things I think that's driven that is we've had a really good relationship with things like doctoral training centres. And actually a lot of our staffing and embedded students have come from doctoral training centres. And they've really interfaced well with places like our big laboratories. So my own laboratory, FloWave, which is sort of a £12 million facility, but there's also smaller facilities as well, which are much more agile and engaging with industry as well. And we've been recruiting people in from places like those doctoral training centres. So that's all sort of helped generate a bit more of a culture where the impact hasn't just been about publications, because suddenly we're seeing funds coming in which are actually, sort of in inverted commas, real money. It's not just nice words and so on. We're actually sort of generating real outputs. On timescales are actually quite short compared to what a lot of people have been used to. So one thing that was just in the news the other day is last year we did a project for a company called Steesdale, but they're a company which does floating wind platforms. And just last week it was announced that they won a contract to put 100 megawatts of installed capacity up in one of the Pentland projects in the north of Scotland. Now that's sort of a 1 year turnaround. So that has sort of helped with the culture of, it's not just about the latest, well, everyone's trying to get into GFM, but whatever it is, nature, it was in your own particular sector. So I think that's the good side. Some of the sort of challenges, though, I think we're facing a bit is all our sort of more pure academic work, my own experiences, push to operate at that sort of more concept, low TRL level. And our industry partners are pushing us to solve problems which are a bit more immediate. So sort of mid TRL technology readiness level issues, they're trying to sort of get to that last stage to commercialization. And in the past, quite a good fill for this was our work on Horizon 2020 projects. And I worked on a project several years ago that had about 27 partners, which sounds like a nightmare, but about half of those were industrial. We did a project called Marinette 2, the details of which don't matter, but it was all about getting universities, and especially universities with facilities, to engage with industry. So we had, I think, 7 companies over 3 years come to use our facility. Rule is they had to be non-UK based, but still you're still really building up a really good relationship with industry, and all those links are allowing people to move. And we don't really have a replacement for that work, which is giving us a sort of good partnerships and longer term partnerships. It's great for contract research. Someone turns up and wants a problem solved in 6 months, but for the things which are developed over years, not so much. And I think my sort of one thing I'm quite passionate about is, having managed a team is the short term sort of research contract situation. I'm forever trying to do clever things to build up a team that has a lifespan sort of beyond a 3-year project. Actually now more like all my contracts are sort of 1-year contracts and so on as well. So trying to make sure that we sort of build that continuity, so you can, because otherwise people are drifting off into other sectors and we don't see them again. So yes, those are sort of my thoughts on that. So
Thanks very much. Thanks, Tom. Okay, so I think to kick off the Q&A part of this session, I'll take a couple of questions from the room, and we've got a question coming in online as well. So if you'd like to ask a question of the panel, could you raise your hand, please?
Hi. Is it working? Yeah. Hi, I'm Alexa. I've just finished an engineering degree myself. So, and I found it interesting talking all about how we fill those skills gaps. But one of the problems that we had in my course, and I'm sure it goes for other science and technology courses in general, is making sure that people make the step from actually doing the degree to becoming the profession. So only a third of people who did my course actually became engineers or went into any engineering related profession. So yeah, my question is, do you have any thoughts about how we could help make that a bigger percentage?
Thank you. Okay, so I think we'll kick off with that question about that kind of transition from undergraduate or even postgraduate study into a profession, and how we retain people either within the engineering profession or science communities as well. Who'd like to kick us off on that question?
Shall we go?
Sure,
Yeah.
Rachel, go for it.
So I think my first question would be, I think it's probably higher than that, they're actually using their skills. So I think this one thing is around PhD doesn't necessarily mean you become a professional engineer, but they'll be using those engineering skills in many, many different ways to society. And we need to make it really clear that is just as valued. So not necessarily becoming an engineer doesn't mean you're a failure. But I think we need to signpost much more clearly about those routes into different types of engineering role. And I'm sure my professional colleagues here can say much more about that. And I think the new way of training, the doctoral training programs that we've talked about, are vastly improving that. Hopefully, maybe you were part of one of those, but I think that's sort of being part of a community, that partnership where you've actually got experience of working with partners throughout your PhD will give you that experience inside those placements with industry or other sectors that allow you to use that to sort of get your next role. But I'll stop there and let the people that know something about this answer.
No, thank you. It's a really good point. And so I very much agree with Rachel that it's not a bad thing for people to do first degree in engineering or second degree in engineering or third degree in engineering and then to go off to do other things. I mean, engineering is one of the highest kind of employability degrees that you can do, and that's a great thing. And engineers, for example, are really highly in demand in financial services and management consultancy, and they contribute the skills that they've got through those different forms in a way that still has economic and societal benefit. We would love to get the financial services and management accountancy firms to help us to attract more people into engineering, more diverse people into engineering, if you like, paying their way. But that's important. And actually, we would, for example, love to see more engineers going into policy roles and roles in politics. There are contributions that those skills and mindsets can make right across the economy and society. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think that not everybody, I'm quite happy to say that not everybody's experience of any degree is necessarily what they expect it to be when they make that choice. So for some people, they will do 3 or 4 years of study and find that it hasn't sparked the love and the passion for continuing that career that they might have expected or hoped it would when they started on that degree. And there is a genuine need, for example, in engineering to make sure that we are keeping pace with the way that the world is evolving and the skills that engineers will need to go out and practice. So we know, for example, sustainability, inclusion, digitalization, ethics, these are all things where there's a mixed picture about the extent to which the way they're being dealt with in education is reaching a kind of optimal level. There's more to do there. And then the third factor is there's a big opportunity, I would say, for engineering industry to sell more effectively engineering careers back to students. So, no one's off the hook in this. The professional bodies like the Academy have a role to play, but industry has a big role to play as well, because if they aren't convincing engineering students that engineering careers offer them what people are looking for out of that first job or that long-term career, then that's not something that you can blame any one individual for. And generally, I think this kind of campaign that we are part of to try to change perceptions of how important engineers are to our world, the difference they make in society, actually also contributes to the sense that engineering careers are really worthwhile and they are meaningful ways to pursue something that will make a difference in the world. So I think I should stop there. You can probably tell that if you just let me loose, I'll keep going to the rest of the day, which isn't what you want me to do. Thanks for the question.
And Isabel, does that kind of chime with some of the work you've been doing around kind of retaining the talent that's been trained in UK universities and keeping them within the British innovation sector?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think I don't know what level of degree you were talking about there, but definitely something that we always want to make sure is that people can consider the more academic routes and can consider the research routes as well, because clearly you finish something, you have a choice. Like, do you just go and work in financial services industry, for example, or do you actually pursue a career in R&D, for example? And in order to do that, we as government have a role to play, but wider players have a role to play to make sure that is an attractive proposition, and actually people have the means as well to be able to do that. So it's not just if you've got a lot of economic financial security, you can maybe take a gamble, but actually making that a sustainable option for people from lots and lots of different backgrounds.
And Tom, you just kind of touched a little bit as well there on that kind of mixed funded model that you have at FloWave. Does that help you to recruit people into FloWave, for example?
Yes, and I think one of the things that occurred to me there, I don't know if that was a question for I don't know if that was a undergraduate or postgraduate, but for example, I think sometimes we can be very rigid in as academia more generally in the requirements. You must have a PhD in this and you must have this. So we've created some roles that are aimed more at graduates. So we do all this stuff where we speak to our undergraduates and say, look, how our wonderful facility, and do you want to get into engineering? And then you say, well, you got to go off and do 3 or 4 years of a PhD before you can think about coming to work with us. And yeah, some of these people are just really, for example, we have one person who's a really passionate designer. They love the mechanical engineer, and they may do a PhD eventually, but we're recruiting at that level as well, bringing in those roles so that you can, this gives us more flexibility. We're not having to fit into, usually it involves me inventing a new job title, which requires quite a lot of paperwork, but it is useful to have that flexibility. And I think, being able to recruit at all levels without such rigid, prescribed sort of job descriptors is quite helpful.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to that topic that we've mentioned a few times today about the porosity between the kind of the career paths that you might take through like academia, through universities, and also those the experiences that you get from industry as well. I'm going to take my next question online. So there's a question here from Kyle Martin. And perhaps, Isabel, you might have something to say on this topic. Just kind of acknowledging that the change between the funding to PhD students and things like this. Their question is it not time for a wholesale restructure of how we train PhD students in the UK, given that we need to encourage the porosity between sectors, rather than expecting a PhD student will then go on and do their postdoc and then go and take up a lectureship and take this quite linear approach to an academic career?
Yeah. In brief, probably yes. I think there is definitely things to be looked at. Many of you were probably aware of this, and I mentioned, I think, in my presentation, but UKRI have just finished their consultation on the new deal for postgraduate research, and that includes an element on, I think they call it something like diversification of access and models. So looking exactly at actually, is the way we do this right now actually the way we ought to be doing this, or are there different models we can pursue and go down the road of?
And Rachel, I'm sure you've worked with plenty of PhD students who have left academia or have come back to academia as well. Have you any reflections on that kind of model that we have currently?
And I think it certainly is time to do something about this. So one of the things that we've been working really hard on is not so much the stipended students in science and technology who, with an uplift, could probably just afford to live this winter. But we have a whole, certainly at King's and at Sussex, we had a whole bunch of students that were essentially funded through what we call doctoral tutors. So they're paid to teach and that employment contract. Now we've had a really good go at that at King's. So there is, fair reward for fair pay for work and holidays and maternity pay and sick pay. So they are actually employed to carry out that role. It may be time to look at that across the piece, that actually that as you enter to start your doctoral studies, you become an employee and you actually start that contract. Europe's been doing this for a very long time. I think there are elements of that. Now I have to be careful what I say because it costs a lot more to do it that way. Yeah. But it is very compelling that actually that is the time to transition from being a student to being an employee with all the rights that come with employment at that stage. Might actually be a really good way of taking us forward, not wanting to preempt the consultation that is about to come out.
And Hayaatun, have you any reflections on that?
Well, if I just broaden that out, I mean, my colleagues have given excellent answers. The only thing I would add is I just think generally we have to become more flexible in the way that we view routes into science and engineering careers across a lifetime. We're still in a position where you start making a career choice when you're sort of 14 years old. And it's ridiculous. Which 14-year-old is well placed to decide what they want to spend a 50+ year career doing? And the world around us is changing so fast, paced, technology is changing, the shape of workforce, the way we want to live our lives is changing. So to me, it's inconceivable that we won't see a future where you can sort of pivot into and pivot out of technical careers at different career points. And we will eventually, I hope, start to see the value in what that composite experience brings. It's a fantastic thing to come into one career with the backdrop and experience of another career behind you, and that is another form of diversity. So I hope that this is a sort of microcosm of a larger change that we will see, but I am a relentless optimist. There you go.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions from the room? At the back here, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, it's Katie Perry here. I'm Chief Executive of the Daphne Jackson Trust. It was really just a question around the people and culture strategy and the 3 bubbles that you had on there regarding talent. It appeared to me that all of those are really aimed and focused at pulling in talent from abroad. My question is, what exactly are you doing to retain talent that is in the UK? And I think that goes to the question over there as well. There are many people who are extremely talented, and I'd like to know what exactly you're doing to either pull people back in, for example, returners, or help those who are talented and get the talent from the UK. Don't just focus on getting people in from abroad.
Isabel, can I start with you?
Yeah, really happy to know. Absolutely. We're definitely not just focused on getting talent in from abroad. I mean, that is an aspect, but retaining the amazing talent that we have here in the UK is absolutely on equal footing to that. So there's clearly there's different things you need to do for different audiences, right? So some of the things I talked about under the kind of talent pillar are, yeah, you're right, are more the things that you would do at targeting talent that is not currently in the UK, whether that is returners or whether that is people who just haven't been here before. But actually a lot of the other aspects of the people and culture strategy, including the kind of environment and what I said just earlier about making it a viable career choice, making it a stable career choice and an attractive career choice for people who are here, and the great talent that we've got here is absolutely part of the retaining that talent. And it includes making sure that there is funding available through the fellowships, through the academies, for example, but also UKRI. So it is absolutely not the case that we're saying we need lots of talent to come in. We absolutely want to retain the domestic talent as well. I think one of the reasons we often talk a little bit about bringing in talent from abroad as well is because actually, if you look at how many people we think we need working in R&D, we would have to ramp the domestic pipeline up massively very, very quickly to meet that. So there's clearly a role for both aspects, so the domestic talent as well as the domestic from the international talent from abroad, in order to really get the right people that we need to make this sustainable.
And I think maybe if I'm hearing your question correctly, Katie, there's a little bit in there as well around the diversity that we have of our careers. Certainly over the last couple of years in HE, we've seen a lot of industrial action, a lot more than we're used to seeing in HE, I think it's fair to say. And a lot of this is motivated around the kind of precariety of contracts as well, which will disproportionately affect people who are carers, who have to take parental leave. Rachel, perhaps you have some comments and reflections on how universities try and retain people who are on these precarious contracts and have other life commitments as well.
And certainly, so I talked about all the things with the sad face that I'm trying to fix, and as the Senior Vice President, that diversity of pipeline is really, really important. So King's has got a fantastically diverse undergraduate base, but as soon as we go to PhD, that becomes much less diverse. Once we get to postdoc, we just see that pipeline leaking all over the place. And that progression must be something around, well, a mixture of essentially being able to draw a picture of what it looks like to get there and demonstrating that this is achievable, that sort of trajectory and support to get yourself along that pathway. But also just not using really short-term fixed-term contracts. So at every time we look at a contract, we essentially extend it as long as possible. We make as many people permanent as possible. And we essentially look at every single case I see coming across my desk. I challenge every PI to extend that as long as possible, or why isn't this an open-ended position? And I think we just have to continuously, address this. Now, we are in times of austerity. We are going to be probably over the next decade looking at having to either find alternative sources of revenue into higher education, or we're going to have a smaller number of people working there. So it is going to be hard, but we absolutely have to ensure that people are fairly contracted fairly to do the work they do, to be able to have a diverse workforce.
And Tom, have you any reflections on this as well from your point of view in Edinburgh?
Most of my work is spent trying to find the next contract for my team.
Right.
So, and it's always occurred to me, what I've always wanted is more of a pool of people. So it's the sort of thing that you sort of have the sort of academic mercenary who does, their 18-month contract and then moves to another 18-month contract. And then in Edinburgh, we have quite a group of people who are, they're not necessarily looking for full academic careers. Actually, that's one thing. It's always, how do you become lecturer? But there's quite a lot of people who have sort of migrated to my team because we're a little bit sort of hybrid and not sort of traditional academic who enjoy the engineering. They want more like an engineering career, but they like the whole research environment. And I think we tend to lose those people quite a lot. So we're always struggling to recruit. They go off to industry, but perhaps not when they would actually rather stay in a role working with us. So a lot of those roles essentially is a sort of fight to make them permanent. And I think if there's anything I'd like to sort of see is more of a push from higher up, particularly in my university, but more broadly to try and turn those into permanent contracts, because they're a very useful resource, and it takes a long time to train replacements when we lose them. And I've lost quite a lot of people over the years because they hit a ceiling that's a little bit lower than their talent, quite a lot lower than their talent sort of demands a lot of the time. So I don't have a very sort of positive answer on it, but I would welcome anything that allows us to try and extend those, because I think it costs us quite a lot in terms of training up new people.
Absolutely, I can imagine.
We lose a lot of good people.
And Hayaatun, thinking more about the kind of positive news stories, perhaps you talked earlier about a lot of the things that you're doing in the Academy to diversify the people that you have in the Academy of Engineering. I was wondering if there's anything that you're doing there to kind of help that fix that broken, that leaky pipeline.
I mean, I think a lot of things we do are in a way targeted at that. And like every other organisation, I think diversity inclusion is not a destination. It's something you continuously strive to improve on. It's something that is never finished. And if you think that you're all over it, you're probably missing something. So, I mean, the work that the Daphne Jackson Trust does is a great example of helping to reduce barriers to participation from certain groups who are otherwise likely to become excluded from the workforce or to have their progression impacted. And there are so many different examples of that. There is no one intervention that can tackle all of this, but I think the more you progress down your diversity and inclusion journey, the more you realise that there are new barriers that you haven't noticed before. And so I think, you know, whether it's the way you market your schemes, whether it's the way you ask people to make the application, have you considered neurodivergence? We've got an access mentoring program at the moment to help increase the capacity of people to actually produce effective applications if they come from underrepresented groups in engineering, through to the terms and conditions that are attached to your stipends, through to the way you influence universities to think about excellence. So, for example, we give universities extra slots in some of our flagship schemes if they present more diverse candidates. You know, so many different ways in which you can chip away at this. Nothing will fix everything, but actually the more you do, the more you discover you can do. And I welcome any suggestions from your colleagues in the Future Leaders Network for things that you've either seen elsewhere that you're not seeing widely utilised, or things that you would like us to trial. We have to just keep on at this. Thank you.
I think we've got time for another one or two questions. Yep, at the back there.
Hi, I'm a physics student doing a year in industry, and Rachel, you mentioned something about mentors and champions. As someone who's starting out in the industry, I don't know where to look for these mentors and champions. I was wondering if I could ask all of you where the best place is to look for people like that, especially as someone who is starting out. Thank you.
And what stage are you at? Are you doing a PhD?
I'm doing my year in industry, so I'm my third year of my normal degree.
Oh, so you're an undergraduate?
Yes.
Okay. I can't remember that far back. I mean, I think I probably didn't really, hopefully somebody else can think about undergraduate mentoring, but certainly once you're publishing, one really clever, somebody from the American Geophysical Union pointed this out to me, is once you're publishing, look at who's citing your work, because that's a really good start. If someone's actually bothered to cite you, they've bothered to read your paper, and they've bothered to actually say that there's something relevant you've said. So this, I'm afraid this isn't helping you at all, but I thought that was a really useful tip for understanding. Contact the people that are citing your work, contact the people that are connecting with you, build that network via your sort of online presence. Now, taking that back to undergraduate, I'm not quite sure what the equivalent would be, but maybe it's about social media networks. And I'm a bit old to be talking about social media, but there must be something around who is following you on Twitter, who is connected with you, who's liking what you're putting out there, who is reaching out. And grab that, because I think that is a good start. That people, if someone who has something to offer is following you, I'm trying to check whether, are you a Twitter user? No. Okay, we're not going to go down the social media route. Has anyone else got any good ideas?
I'm happy to have a go. So I think we can get a bit hung up on the idea of a mentor being someone very senior who's going to sort of impart their wisdom to you. And I actually think it's much more about making good connections with people in different roles who you can learn from and share with. And you can start really simply if you're doing an industry placement. I always find that one of the simplest things to do is just ask somebody in the organisation who you respect, you've come across, would you be able to just give me some feedback, or could I ask you more about your role and how you got there? It can be really, really simple. Go to events like this is a fantastic way to meet people. And you look for the people with whom there's some kind of connection, and it doesn't have to be someone more senior than you. Honestly, the most influential people in terms of my mentors / coaches, acknowledging Rachel's very helpful differentiation, have been my peer coaches and mentors, people who have just, over time, we've developed a trusting relationship. They understand my world, I understand their world. And, to this day, I have sessions with those peers. So I've got a couple of different groups, and we'll come with our particular issues or problems, and we workshop them really with each other. So valuable. But I think, ask, doesn't matter who they are. And if it's not a great conversation, you don't have to talk to them again. It's not like you're kind of signing some kind of contract for life. B, they'll change over time. And C, just going to places where you meet slightly different people from the ordinary group that you're in contact with day to day, whether that's events or online events, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Those are all ways to broaden out your network, and you know, trust your judgment. If there's a connection, there's probably, you know, some value in having a follow-on conversation. Stay in touch. I mean, I've known Gavin since we were children, but that's not true. But you know, 20+ years, we started going to the same events and things, and you never know who you're going to stay in touch with. But it's about connection for me.
Can I add one thing? It's a totally different kind of environment for us within government. Like, I'm a career civil servant, but one of the things somebody said to me is, nobody's ever gonna be offended if you ask them to be your mentor, right? Because they will always feel honored.
Yeah.
So if you find somebody who you think they're quite impressive, or they're a bit like me but further on, I want to know how they got there, just ask them. Most people will be delighted and say yes.
I think that's a really important point, actually, that a lot of people will be very open to sharing their experiences. And I think it kind of comes back to the idea of to start things like mentoring and finding a coach and things like this around your career. There's really no too early time to start finding those kinds of contacts, as well as leadership. You know, leadership doesn't just kind of start with a particular role or title by becoming senior vice president or what have we. That kind of comes with a, you know, a whole wealth of different behaviors and professional networks, and coming to things like this, and, you know, reciprocating that mentoring and coaching, especially at a peer-to-peer level, is really important too. Tom, any final thoughts on mentoring and coaching in leadership?
Just on a quite practical level, when I was at that stage, it was things like the sort of professional bodies. So for me, it was mechanical engineering. So there was the local IMechE group, which did its evening visits and so on. But there you get quite good exposure to people who are maybe 5 years out of doing their undergrad, for example, and even a bit longer. So they're not necessarily particularly senior, but they have that they've done the first steps of, you know, what it takes to move from undergraduate to a professional career. And I don't know what the exact equivalent is in physics, but groups like that, I think, are quite a good way to engage with that.
Absolutely. I think that we have just a few more minutes to kind of wrap up on it. Oh, we've got one final question. Can we get the microphone over to here? Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for a really interesting discussion. I'm Jem, I'm from Innovate UK. We've obviously spoken a lot about the importance of universities to harness that talent. I'd be interested to find out about how you see the role of further education, colleges and apprenticeships in harnessing that talent, acknowledging the fact that universities isn't always an option for everyone.
And would anybody like to pick up on that first?
Should I go? So I'm going to give an example from Sussex. So Sussex was part of something called an Institute of Technology, which was absolutely working with FE colleges across Sussex, working with industry across Sussex, and that collaboration across that sort of ecosystem of Sussex SMEs and FE colleges was just starting up as I left, and that was in the engineering sector, in engineering and AI. And I think that has a huge amount of potential in terms of bringing in degree apprenticeships, training up to level 7, up to master's level. And that was just getting going, but I think that absolutely was something that was really exciting to see happening, feeding a sort of graduates into the Sussex sector where there is a shortfall of engineering graduates. There's essentially a lot of SMEs there that cannot get people to come and work in the Sussex area. I know it's not very far from London, but people don't want to come out of London and live there. So I think there's lots of potential around those institutes of technology, which are all over the country. And it looks like this government is going to be committed to that. From what I can see, it's hard to read what's going on in government at the moment, but the Education Secretary does look like that's something she will absolutely drive forward. So I think there's potential in this area, and all universities need to be playing in this space. King's doesn't at the moment, but I think we need to get involved, because certainly Sussex and Southampton are looking at those. So it's a responsibility of the university sector to work with their communities in a collaborative way.
And certainly in engineering, you know, vocational routes are massively important. And there are a number of fellows, including presidents of our academy, who've come into engineering via vocational routes and have no high degree. It's actually not that uncommon to find people in senior leadership roles who've come through that route, but it's amazingly we're basically coy about it. We don't spend enough time shouting about that and showing, you know, that there isn't this sort of two-tier system. You know, you can come into professions through a whole variety of routes. I think engineering is a bit different from, you know, academic science in general in that sense. But they are, you know, we still as a country do not celebrate enough the invaluable contribution that people who come through vocational routes make, but also those who train those who come through vocational routes. And actually in a future where we have more flexibility in careers, FE colleges become even more important. And so, you know, the Academy, a lot of the programs we have in higher education, we are either mirroring or hoping to mirror those in FE, and we are, for example, working with FE colleges in various different parts of the UK as part of our regional program called Regional Talent Engine Program, to try to help people who've come through FE routes enter entrepreneurial careers, which I know will be of interest to Innovate UK, because again, there's a lot of discrepancy in access to becoming an entrepreneur. If you're a successful PhD or postdoc in a university, there's a really well-established route to spinning out a company based on your technology. If you come through an FE route, it's much, much harder. So I completely agree, and thank you for raising it.
Thank you. And I think with just the last minute, maybe Isabel, if I come to you with some kind of final reflections as well on what you've heard on this panel this afternoon.
As ever, really, really interesting. So I think in general, there's probably quite often a perception that we in government like sit somewhere in Whitehall, squirreled away, you know, trying to think about things, but actually it's really, really important for us to talk to people and to hear from people. So I'm always really impressed with the kind of insight you get from these events and the views you get from people, and also the challenges we get, and it's really, really valuable to us. So just a big thank you from my side.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, we're coming to time now, so I think I'll bring this panel to a close, but I encourage anybody who's not had the opportunity to pose the question that they wanted to find our panel members on social media, because that's the advice of let's all get on Twitter and LinkedIn. And otherwise, I'd like to thank all of our panel members and for everybody participating in the full conference today.